Doon po sa gustong umupo na medyo malapit-lapit ng konti, meron pang upuan dito sa aking kanan. In fact, baka gusto nyong lumapit lang na yung medyo nahihirapan na magbasa ng medyo malilit na ng letra. Okay? Kasi, ayan, umamin. Salamat. Can I have a slide? Can I have the first saglit lang kasi tinutulungan ako ng aking anak. Isa sa mga very popular na mga stories sa Bible, especially in the Old Testament, is that of David and of course Goliath. Okay? Lahat naman tayo siguro isa ito sa mga kilalang-kilala nating kilalang-kilala nating kwento sapagkat naiiba nga na ang isang shepherd ay matatalo niya ang isang seasoned soldier. Kumbaga, ito ang ating paksa ngayong araw na to at dadaanan ho natin the whole chapter of 1 Samuel 17. So, although alam na po natin itong kwento na to, hopefully meron pa rin po tayong mga matututunang mga lessons at tayo rin po ay may maiuwing aral na magbibigay ng lakas sa ating paniniwala, lalo na sa ating Panginoon. So, let's now read. I titled the message just before that, The Faith of David, and I'm showing you the David as a shepherd, as a musician, and probably in that image, he's probably just 15 years old or even a little younger. So ganyan ho yung setting natin, no? Okay, and then let's go to verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Succoth in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Damin between Sokohan and Azekah. So this is the background. Okay, so the Philistines were at war with the Israelites, and so were the Israelites also, because the Israelites were commanded by God to take certain lands. Sabi ng Diyos sa kanila, binibigay ko yung lupa na yan at go and take it. Verse 2, Saul, who is the king of Israelite, who is the first king pala, then, and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. So you can just imagine, you have lots of soldiers on one side, and Philistines and the Israelites. And they were in a stalemate. Okay, so medyo naghihintay sila kung sinong unang gagalaw. Verse 3, the Philistines occupied one hill, the Israelites another, with the valley between them. So that's the scene. So imagine po natin yung ganyang klaseng scenario. Siguro ang pinakamalapit na ma-imagine natin is kung tayo po ay nanonood ng mga old movies or war movies, and we can sort of imagine how that might have looked like, no? And this is now the verse 4. Now, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. So, I have here a picture of Goliath, who is described here as a champion. When we say a champion, parang hindi lang yan nanalo na isang beses, pero ilang beses na yan tarang nagtagumpay sa kanyang pakikilaban, no? So he's known, he's the best doon sa mga soldiers. He has won so many battles for the Philistines. And the Philistines really relied on him heavily. Now, his height is described here. His height was 6 feet cubits and a span. Other translations say that's about 9 feet and 9 inches. So that's about 10 feet. So gaano ba kataas ang 10 feet? Tapos baka lampas pa ng konti dito sa bubong po natin, no? So he really stood out hindi lang siya matangkad, pero he was really muscular and well-built as a soldier. Hindi ho siya, ano bang tawag natin sa Filipino yun? Hindi, lampa. Oo, sa Pangasinan, we have a term for that, parang langkaway. Langkaway. So, very tall, pero medyo parang lang siyang, yung kilos niya ay walang laman, walang lakas, no? He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. Okay? On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. So meron ho siyang javelin, his spear. Maliban dun sa javelin niya, meron pa siyang spear. Shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. So maliban dun sa how well he was fitted, he still had an armor bearer. Okay, so ganun karami ho ang kanyang armor. Okay, sa kanya, tsaka meron pa siyang reserve dun sa ano. So ano ba ang ibig sabihin ng bronze helmet niya, scale armor, all of these weighing 5,000 shekels, that's about 58 kilos. Okay, or 128 pounds. Sino ba sa atin ang 128 pounds? That's probably the weight of an average Filipino person. Ano lang yun yung helmet lang, tsaka yung sinusuot lang niya. At tsaka yung spear niya, yung head ng spear is about 15 pounds. So, napakabigat. Kaya kung iniisipin po natin na si Goliath ay matangkad lang, medyo hindi ho tama yun. Kasi talagang kayang-kaya naman ho niyang buhatin itong mga napakabigat na panlaban ho niya, no? So he even had a shield being carried by his shield bearer. So in total, kung gagamitin ho niya pati yung shield po niya, it would probably amount to at least 200 pounds. So pag nakakita po kayo ng 200 pound na tao, alam nyo napakataba po yan, no? At mabigat na mabigat. The description of his armor tells us how much protected and armed he is. It's interesting how Samuel, who may have written this book, was very detailed in those kinds of descriptions. Okay, but it tells us how much protected he is. He is portrayed to be in such an impressive and formidable and deadly outfit. Everything was custom made for him. The detailed description also emphasized on the unusual length of his spear and just how heavy everything is that he is wearing. Even though Goliath is a very experienced warrior, he nonetheless depends on this heavy armor of his. So, yun ho yung ano niya. That's who he is. He depends on his armor. Verse 8 now. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel. So he challenges Israel. Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? So parang niyang china-challenge, hindi lang china-challenge, parang minamalit ho niya ang Israelite. In fact, minamalit po niya si Saul. Okay? Minamalit ho niya ang king ng Israel. And he mentions him in his challenge. So he taunts, he scoffs, he belittles them. Okay? Tapos sabi niya, send someone to fight against me. You know? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he's able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. Sinasabi lang ba niya yun? Kasi gagawin nila? Or sinasabi niya yun kasi alam niya hindi mangyayari? But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. So tinatakot niya talaga yung mga Israelites. And with that stature, iniisip ko lang kung para siyang 10-foot sumo wrestler almost, nakakatakot talaga. Sabi, sigaw-sigaw siya doon, no? Then, verse 10, the Philistines said, "This day," sabi niya, "I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." Kumbaga gusto niya magkaroon ng spectacle kung paano niya papatayin ang soldiers ng mga ano. Sabi niya, "I'm challenging you, send someone." Of course, wala. Takot ang mga Israelites. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. So Saul, the king, who also is a commander-in-chief, sabi rito sa verse 11, they were, what? Dismayed. Terrified. So when you say dismayed, talagang walang-wala siyang masabi. Parang nahihiya nga siya nakakahiya sa kanya. So verse 11, so Saul and the others are losing hope. Diyan, ibig sabihin ng dismayed. And they are alarmed. Another way to say it is they were horror-stricken because it was just probably a matter of time as far as Saul is concerned before they are defeated. And you know what? Saul also was a tall man. Saul, when he was chosen, was partly when Samuel said, "Oh," he was impressed because Saul was also 6 feet and a half feet tall. So matangkad din siya. But then, kung 6 feet yan, 3 more feet ang taas ho ni ano. So impressive na si Saul, pero more impressive naman si Goliath in terms of how he looked. Verse 12 now. David enters the scene dito sa story, okay? Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Where did Jesus Christ came from? Also Bethlehem, di ba? Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time, he was very old, si Jesse yung father. So, this talks about David and his family background. Jesse's 3 oldest sons, in verse 13, had followed Saul to the war. So they were enlisted. David had, let me see, 8 brothers. He was the youngest. So in this case, sabihin na natin he was probably 15 years old. So his other brothers were probably in their 20s. And they qualified to be enlisted in Saul's army. So the 3 eldest were enlisted. Okay, Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. So just imagine the description of this passage. Okay, let's sort of be sensitive as to bakit ganito kaya ang pagsulat nitong kwento na to. He was talking about the firstborn and in-emphasize pa doon na David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep in Bethlehem. David could not be in the army. He just would not qualify. Malalaman ho natin mamaya. Okay? Now, verse 16, for 40 days, kalayan yung 40 days, for more than 1 month, the Philistine, referring to Goliath, came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Okay? I'm also imagining that every time he takes a stand, baka palapit ng palapit yung mga Philistines against the Israelites. Okay? They were probably closing in. So, balikan ko lang ho yung verse 15. Bakit kailangan po ni David to went back and forth? Because that's his job. He was a shepherd. And also, pinapadala kasi siya ng kanilang tatay para magpadala ng pagkain, para magpadala ng kung ano-ano. Diba? Verse 16. In chapter 16, by the way, this is just a backgrounder. David was called to play the lyre to soothe the king when he suffered from some evil spirit. So, meron na hong background kwento na nung si King Saul po ay nagkakaroon ng parang depression, he sent for David. So, parang alam na ho ni Saul, kilala na ho niya actually, kilala na niya si David in a way, but I don't know to what extent. No? And verse 17, now Jesse said to his son David, ito na yun kung bakit niya pinapadala. No? Why is it that David had to go back and forth? Verse 17, take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. So may pinapadala yung kanilang tatay na roasted grain, kumbaga pagkain, loaves of bread to your brothers and hurry to their camp. Bakit kaya niya kailangan magpadala? Is it because nagugutom sila? Maybe. But more of the reason was that kailangan din malaman kasi ni Jesse kung kumusta na yung kanyang mga anak. Verse 18 now, take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. Now, imagine ho natin, bigat-bigat din itong dinadala ni David, no? Pero yung 10 cheeses po, special po yon. See how, kanino niya dadalhin? Sa kanilang commander of their unit. Bakit kaya? Yeah? Ako, parang iniisip ko lang, bakit mo bibigyan ng yung commander? Siguro naman, pag ako bilang tatay, bibigay ako sa kanilang boss. Aalagaan yung aking mga anak. Hindi ho basta-basta nang ipapahamak at iuuna sa baka naman gano'n, no? Siyempre, ikaw at tatay, gusto mo maayos ang kanyang babalik na buhay yung mga anak. So, yun siguro ang isang dahilan. Kasi parang parang pagkasulat parang gano'n special pa yung binigay niya, no? Verse 18, they are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Ephah, fighting against the Philistines. So verse 20 now, early in the morning, David left the flock. Iniwanan ho yung kanyang mga tupa. Marami ho yun. Okay? Hindi lang ho yan mga 10. Daan-daan din po ang kanyang inaalagaan siguro. Loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions. So you can just imagine every morning, they start to have that formation just in case magkakaroon na po ng sagupaan. No? Verse 21, Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. So imagine na po natin parang palapit na po sila. Verse 22, David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. Kasi yun ho yung concern ng kanyang tatay. Verse 23, as he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Okay? Parang nung binabasa ko to, parang it struck me how that phrase came about, and David heard it. He heard what? Goliath shouting. He heard it. He also noticed the reaction of the Israelites. How fearful they have become when Goliath shouted and defied the soldiers of Israel. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, meaning Goliath, they all fled from him in great fear. So, magpo-position po sila. Paglalabas na po si Goliath, atras na naman po sila. You know, that's how it is. Okay? Verse 25 now. Now the Israelites had been saying, Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king, sabi rito, will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. So ano yun? Ha? Parang bribery, di ba? May konting ganun. Kasi no one else. So parang both it's like, wala ba sa inyong willing to take a risk? Pero kung kaya niyong patayin yan, yung daughter ko ibibigay ko sa kanya. Okay? He will belong to the royal family. Wala siyang isipin na BIR. Kumbaga. Okay? So, para isipin ho natin, in other words, why did Saul had to resort to this kind of statements is because they were hopeless. You know? They were so fearful. Ewan ko lang kung papayag yung anak niya, no? Pero the thing is, that's how it is. I mean, parang lahat bibigay ko sa'yo. Verse 26, para siya magiging anak ni Saul eh. Kung sino man yung makakatalo kay ano, para siya maging anak ni Saul. Verse 26 now, David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel?" Notice the word disgrace. Pinapahiya ang Israelites. So tinatanong niya, iba yung naririnig niya, ito yung mga haka-haka na naririnig ko, na bibigay daw ni Saul yung kanyang anak and all that. Pero tinanong niya mismo. And then, ito yung who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? You know what? David could not believe that no one is challenging the defiance of the Philistine against God. David could not believe the disgrace of Israel. And of course, he calls it the Philistine. He belittles the Philistine as uncircumcised. In other words, an unclean person who does not belong to the children of God. They were not chosen. Kumbaga, he's an uncircumcised. We are chosen. We are the holy people of God. And of course, the circumcision kasi is a sign of the covenant that God made, that He will be a God to the Israelites. So parang, he could not believe that this has been going on for 40 days already. And no one seems to be challenging. In fact, they were so fearful. Verse 28 now, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, okay, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness?" "I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." Galit na galit si Eliab. Why is he so angry? Why is his firstborn so angry with David? We have to remember that in chapter 16, when Samuel was choosing the next king in line, di ba? Pumarada lahat yung mga anak ni Jesse, from the eldest to the youngest. In fact, nung nakita ni Samuel si Eliab, the firstborn, he was impressed. Sabi niya sa isip niya, ito na yun. Ito na yung magiging next king Israel. Okay? Yun na akala ni Samuel. Si Eliab naman, being the firstborn, hindi ba ang firstborn always takes preeminence? Firstborn, yan, ang daming privileges yan. But unfortunately, he wasn't chosen. And probably that's the reason why nagalit na galit siya kay David. He was holding a grudge. Even though he was the brother, nonetheless, he was the youngest. He doesn't know how to fight. He was just a shepherd, while Eliab is fighting with the army. So really, this is the line of thinking of Eliab. Okay? Eliab felt insulted that David was even there. He also thought David was arrogant and self-conceited. So, basta yun ho yung dahilan yan. Verse 29 now, and David was saying, "What have I done? Huh? Can't I even speak? Hindi ba ito yung language ng mga bata? Di ba? Yung mga sa pamilya, di ba? Ganyan yan eh. Yung mga matatanda, parating ganitong gawin mo. Pag magsasalita yung youngest, hindi pinapansin. Yeah? Ay, batang-bata ka pa. Di ba may kantang batang-bata ka pa? Di ba? Lahat ng sinasabi niya parang hindi pinapansin, hindi man pinapakinggan. Eh, bata ka pa, anong alam mo? Di ba? What have I done? What wrong have I done? Can't I even speak? Besides, he was sent there by their father. He was belittled by the eldest. Sabi nga, he got no respect. No? He got no respect. Verse 30 now, he then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. And the man answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. What was it that David said? It was in the verse 26 where it says, why is it that we are allowing this uncircumcised to defy the armies of the living God? Sabi niya, diba? Yun yung ano. So, nakarating kay Saul. Oh, finally, may isang taong willing atang lumaban. Okay? Kasi they were really desperate. Itong batang ito, may sinabi siya, kasi nga, paabutin nga natin kay King itong sinabi niya. So, and of course, Saul sent for him. And then, verse 32 now, David said to Saul, he was now before the king himself. And what did he say? Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Okay? Your servant will go and fight him. That's in verse 32. So what he was also saying is, diba, remember the belittling, the Philistines belittling the Israelites. David was belittled by his brother, but David also belittled this fearful soldier. He said basically what David was saying, your servant will go and fight him. Remember the song kanina? Here I am. Here I am. Isn't that interesting that verse, here I am, is something that we probably need to think about more. Now, verse 32 now, Saul said, yung nakita niya, ano sabi ni Saul? Verse 33, nung sinabi ni David, remember yung picture ni David kanina? Yung sa first, ano natin, he was probably 15, then, no. Ang sabi ni Saul sa kanya, verse 30, you are not able to go out against this Philistine, diba? And fight him? Why? You are only a young man. And he has been a warrior from his youth. So this tells us how really insignificant David looked before Goliath and also before the other soldiers. Okay? Physically, David did not fit the profile of a valiant, tested soldier who can face a seasoned warrior. So, no question about that. As far as the Saul is concerned, masyado ka atang mayabang. You know? Masyado ka atang, you know, like just a kid, you know. Hindi mo ba alam kung ano yung kalaban mo? Verse 34, but David said to Saul, your servant has been. So here in verse 34, kasi hindi nga convince hindi convince si Saul. No? David now tries to convince Saul that he can actually fight this Philistine. So, ano sabi ni Saul? Ano sabi ni David kay Saul? Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. Okay, it's about sheep. Okay. Siguro, ayaw na niya siguro pakinggan si David. Pero sabi niya, when a lion or a bear, okay, tell me more. came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Okay? Okay, sabi ni Saul siguro, that is interesting. Verse 36, your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because, and this is his reason, this is what made him say those bold things that he can defy. Because what? He has defied the armies of the living God. In short, he is defying God himself, the living God that we serve. So that was his reason. David declares that Goliath is no greater than a bear or a lion. In fact, this is just my thought, magdadalawang isip din siguro si Goliath if he were to face a bear or a lion na kakalabanin niya. You know? Even with his armor, because a lion and a bear are also very, very powerful animals. David says if he has killed those animals, he can also defeat and kill Goliath because he had defied, remember, the living God. Parating sinasabi ni David, the living God. The living God. Okay. His main reason for fighting is not for his self-glory. It's not to be able to marry Saul's daughter. It's not to be able to be tax-free all the rest of his life. No, it's never for self-gain, nor to be a part of the royal family. David's main reason then is to fight for the glory of the living God. In verse 37, he says, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will also rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. It was not, take note of verse 7, it was not really because David was stronger than the lion or stronger than the bear, but because God has rescued him from the paws or jaws of those animals before. David's assurance of victory depended not on his own skills primarily, but because of his previous experiences of the Lord delivering him. Let's take note of that. He attributes his success against those animals not because of himself, but because the Lord has delivered him. Isn't that a wonderful insight into how David's faith actually worked? Therefore, the Lord will also rescue, deliver, save him from this Philistine. God will give him the victory. Saul said to David, okay, go and the Lord be with you. So he gives him his blessing. He was convinced. It was worth a try, di ba? Sige, subukan natin. Yeah, it was worth a try. So what did he do? Verse 38, then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. Tinanggal ho niya ang kanyang mga armor. Very impressive ho ang mga armors nila ngayon. Talagang shiny and all that. And so he put it on David. Own tunic, coat of armor on him, and a bronze helmet on his head. Okay? Can you just imagine the 15-year-old? Okay? Nilalagyan ho siya ng mga armor of somebody who's probably in his, I don't know how old Saul is by this time, maybe in his 30s. So he was a grown up, very tall, you know, 6.5 feet, no? Bibigyan mo sa siguro, hindi pa naman matangkad na matangkad si David at this time. So, okay. Sige, binihisan siya. As he stood, everybody was impressed. Oh, although medyo mahaba-haba ata yung, medyo malaki ata yung sapatos niya. Medyo mukhang hindi ata, pero pwede na rin, no? Pwede na rin. When he tried to walk, okay, ang ganda-ganda yung tsura niya, nakatayo, okay? Kasi kabibihis sa kanya. When he tried to walk, what? Everybody must have laughed. Kumakalampang yung mga armor niya. He must have moved about in clumsy and ridiculous manner. It wasn't for him. It didn't fit him. Diba? And this is sabi niya in next verse 39. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I'm not used to them. I don't fight like this. I wasn't trained to fight like this. So he took them off. Okay? He was the one who took it off. Parang hindi sila convinced siguro that he had to be the one to just remove it. And then he took his staff instead in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream. There's something about stones in the stream that maybe because of the flowing of the water, they become very, very smooth. Okay? And put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistines. So, detailed din po ang pag-describe sa armor ni David, pero napakasimple po ang kanyang sandata, kumbaga. He was exposed. He was exposed. His head had no protection. His body had no protection. All he had was a staff and a sling and 5 stones. Okay. So just imagine how that looked like. And of course, if you were Saul, you were saying, okay, fight. If we lose one child, that's okay. Bata pa lang naman yan. Yeah? Verse 41, meanwhile, the Philistines with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. Okay? So kasi David now approached the Philistines. Okay? So, ito ho si Kuya Goliath, laki-laki niya. Kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy. Sa tingin po niya, parang lang yan, wala pang 10 taon siguro to, di ba? Ganyan. Yet, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. Alam niyo ba na yung handsome was applied to David so many times? There's really something about him being handsome. But yet, of course, siguro naiinggit din si Goliath. He despised him, I mean, Goliath had the height and everything, but he looked ugly. I don't know. Verse 43, he said to David, am I a dog? Meron kang stick na dala-dala? Okay? That you come with me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Take note of that. We're talking about gods here. The gods, more than one, the gods of David and of Goliath, and the living God of David. Okay. Come here, he said. I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. How did David look at the situation? Was Goliath insulting the soldiers? How did he look at that? Or did David see that Goliath was actually challenging the God of Israel? So this is, in a way, a fight, a battle of gods. That's one way we can look at it. Who is the true God? And that's David's concern. Verse 46, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. Notice how David speaks as if he hears God so well. As if he really knows the will of God. As if God is so close to him, telling him what to do. And I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day, I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals. Binalik ho niya yung challenge ni, or yung mga curses ni Goliath. And take note, in the end of verse 46, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. That is why David was fighting this giant. That the world will know, the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. Let's look centuries after that. Could it be that our faith now actually was because of this particular incident? That we know God now because of this particular incident. The battle is not to settle who is the better army between them. Rather, this battle will settle once and for all who the real God is. This battle will settle the God that gives victory, and therefore the God deserving of worship. Verse 47, all those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give all of you into our hands. The battle is the Lord's. Okay? Again, look at the impressive weapons they all had. Not only that of Goliath, but all of the armies combined. And yet David says simply, it's not by the sword or spear that the Lord saves. It's not through that, for the battle is the Lord's. Okay. Verse 48, as the Philistine moved closer to attack him. Okay, and here it is the scene. David ran quickly toward the battle in line to meet him. He was not afraid. He was not afraid. And of course, you can just imagine, I like this picture kasi parang ano siya, dynamic yung picture, gumagalaw silang dalawa. You know, it's not like David was just, Goliath was just waiting for David to come near. He was actually after. Nagalit na po si Goliath. He was burning with hatred. Talagang papatayin na niya si David. Okay? It's not just like he was just listening to a boy. He was really after killing David. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Verse 50 now. Okay. So David, closer to attack him, David ran. I think I missed verse 49. Okay. Balikan ko lang ho yung verse 49 because I think isa ito sa mga pinaka-importanting verses. I'm sorry for... Okay. Okay, suspense po. Okay, verse 49. It says, as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battling line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out one stone, nilagay ho niya sa sling niya, inikot-ikot niya, okay? He released it, he slung it, and struck the Philistine right on the forehead, okay? Right on the forehead. In one quick swing, as David released that stone and hit Goliath right in the middle of his forehead, what happened? It penetrated through his skull, knocked him out, and he fell face down. Look at how detailed the story is. Face down and unconscious. If you parang pag nadapa ka face down, nakakahiya talaga po yun. Diba? Kakahiya ho yun. Talagang, what happened there? Diba? Ayaw ko, may mga expressions tayo dyan sa mga pag talaga, nakakahiya ho yan. Siguro iba yung nahulog kang pa ganyan, pero yung face down, it really means you're defeated. Okay? And so, David triumphs over the Philistines with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. When the battle was beginning, the Philistines were jeering. Okay? They were probably cheering, yes, but also jeering, meaning to say, iniinsulto nila sila, tinatawanan lang si David. Ang mga Israelites naman, what were they saying? Were they saying, yeah, fight, David? No, but you were probably quiet. Okay? Naku, mamatay na siya. Ano pa yan? Nakakaya tayo. But, the turn of events, can you imagine that? The dramatic scene ended with David without a sword, subduing the greatest enemy of Israel. And the scene, let's just end the scene there. And what happened? Everybody was surprised. Everybody could not believe their eyes. Saul, who was probably watching, was suddenly, was speechless. Okay? Speechless. Remember in Hebrews 11, I don't think I have that, but what more shall I say? Hebrews 11 is the book of the chapter on faith. I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle, routed foreign enemies. And so I would like us to just maybe look at this story from the faith perspective of David. I titled this message, The Faith of David, because I feel that is exactly what is being explained here. So what are the lessons? Next verse, number 1 is that faith allowed David to be intimately acquainted with God. Remember during the battle, as if he was hearing from God. As if God was telling him, I will defeat this. I will deliver this giant into your hands. I will deliver him. And so everything was, David heard everything. It was so real. So his faith made him intimately acquainted with God. David knew the Lord so well, he understood his will more than anybody else in Israel. Not even the king. He felt him. He heard him. He saw him. That's why he knew he will win. Next lesson. David's faith gave him the desire to glorify God above everything else. That fight was not for himself. That fight was for him. Okay? David it made him keenly aware and appreciate God's provision and intervention in his life. He looked back at those times when he was protected. He treasured those moments when God intervened in his life. He never forgot it. The ultimate reason for David facing a formidable enemy was so that all may know that there is one true God. Another lesson. Faith does not rely on the talent, skills, and abilities of a man, but it makes the heart of man completely dependent on God. Okay? Faith does not, he faced Goliath aware of his limitations, aware of his weaknesses. We can also say aware of his strength. Okay? But more than that, he was aware of God's strength and protection and his ultimate desire. God takes the ordinary and transforms it to the extraordinary. Number 4, faith does not mean the absence of action or preparation, but it guides the action towards surrendering to the will of God. So, faith could mean surrendering. Faith could mean fighting. Okay? In the end, faith reveals the true God in our lives. I will ask the question, why did David select 5 stones? Why did he select 5 stones when one sufficed? Because he didn't know that one would suffice. I suppose that he was really trying to figure out that, I may miss, I may hit him on his leg, but he may not yet, He doesn't know. So he prepared. So when he released that one stone, I'd like to think that it was actually God holding that stone when it was released and putting it exactly where it should hit the forehead, right in the center. What are the chances? If this were just a human ability, what are the chances of hitting a moving target who was also covered and right at that very spot would hit it? What are the chances? Maybe 0.0001. But because God held that stone when it was released and put it exactly there, perfect, exactly. One stone did it. And sometimes when you think about it, what does that stone represent? It represents Christ. He is that stone, the cornerstone, Let me just read that to you because I think it's very important in 2 Peter 2. Sabi niya, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame. I think that's Christ acting on behalf of David. Last lesson, faith is not concerned so much about details. How is David to be killed? What am I going to wear? Where will we meet? Okay. Where in the valley are we going to fight? When should we fight? Is it going to be early in the morning? Should we going to be at night? We can look at all of the details. In fact, the details, when we were reading the passages, there were so much details there. But we were so surprised that even though the details were 5 stones, only one was needed. So faith is not concerned so much about details of things, but finds sufficiency in the greater picture of the sovereignty of God. All that David knew is that God should be revealed to the whole world and that there is one true living God. So isn't that amazing? How much David's faith informs us today of how we also need to be intimately connected with God, to be intimately aware of our need for Him, to be honest about our limitations, and yet also acknowledge that God is working in each one of us. No matter how ordinary, No matter how people look at you, whether you're just a boy, a little girl, a shepherd, God can work mightily in your life. And David happens to be one of the giants of faith, as recorded in Hebrews 11. And David serves as an inspiration to many. David became the king of Israel, and the lineage of David came Jesus Christ himself, the King of all kings. And so it is just right that in this next verse, next slide, we always take a look at this. Faith is the bird that sings when the dark is still dawn. In other words, the bird believes dawn is coming. There will be a light. The sun will shine. Amidst the darkness that we all sometimes face because we doubt ourselves, this story of David should give us hope, should give us faith that indeed life will be much better because God works through us. Faith makes us all winners. Thank you.